It's the strictest whiskey tasting ever.
It was Scotch versus Indian.
Yeah.
And who won?
That's the story, right? This goes against everything I was told. So on today's episode of the Whiskey Pod, I've got Jim Murray, and it's not often that you get to interview someone like him. And the reason why Jim Murray is in India is the gentleman with me right now, Nikhil. So Nikhil runs All Things Nice, and unless you've lived under a rock in the F&B industry, you would absolutely know who he is. For me personally, All Things Nice has brought some of the most memorable experiences in wines and spirits to India.
Oh, thank you.
So Nikhil, over to you. Tell the listeners a little bit more about Jim and why is he in India right now?
We always want to, first of all, thank you for having me here. Our agenda has always been that we get the world's very best to share with all of us and enhance our appreciation of the things that we really like, which is, in this case, wines and spirits. In Jim's case, of course, whiskeys. In my opinion, there is nobody that can put thought to paper to describe a whiskey the way Jim does it. He's on another level. For someone who thinks they know whiskey,
Yeah.
I have been humbled by a quick conversation with him. And that relationship started many years ago. So we had brought Jim Murray to India about 8 years ago or so. And of course, you always wanted to bring him back. But my first impression of Jim Murray came when I was gifted a book. And it has this signature on it. I still have it. And I read through all the tasting notes of all my favorite whiskeys. And it leapt out at me that my understanding of that whiskey was quite different from the way he looks at it. And I then tried to change it to what he writes to see, because what he writes is brilliant. Whiskeys and waves, all that. And I think that's what I wanted to share with people here.
Thank you so much for making this happen.
Thank you.
We will have you back on the podcast as a dedicated episode and more episodes, I hope, in the future.
All right. Thank you. Good luck.
Jim Murray, welcome to India and welcome to the Whiskey Pod.
Just always great to be here.
What an honor to have you. I have attended a tasting of yours a while back in India at Taj. And that was like transformative in many ways because we tasted some good Indian whiskey that time.
It was 1 against 1.
Yeah.
It was Scotch versus Indian.
Yeah.
And who won?
That's the story, right? Extraordinary indeed. Before we get into that, in today's conversation, I will touch upon Indian whiskeys and especially your view about Indian whiskeys because I think you have you're one person in the world who has such an overview of Indian whiskey right from the beginning. First things first, how did you get into whiskey?
How did I get into whiskey? There's two ways of looking at that. You could go down the wicked uncle route, who when I was about 10, poured me a teacher's and thought he would have a laugh by watching me choke on it. And much to his astonishment, I actually asked for more. That it was a Dickensian Oliver Twist. And I thought, wow. So I was about 10, didn't choke on it. And I thought, wow, this has got extraordinary flavour. And the real turning point, however, came about 7 years later. By that time I'd left school. I was working as a journalist, a trainee journalist at a news agency. And I only had 2 weeks holiday a year. And I spent it by getting on a train, going up to Scotland. I was only on £15 a week. It was zero money. So I was, somehow I saved something, got the train. Now I could afford that. But beyond that, I was struggling. So I had to hitchhike. But I was determined to go around the whole north of Scotland and see a distillery somewhere along the line. And I turned up at the Talisker distillery. And I always looked a bit older than I actually am. And they allowed me into the warehouse. And they poured me whiskey straight from the cask. And that was genuinely a life-defining moment. No two ways about it.
How long back was that?
That was in 1975.
Wow.
That was in 1975. And from that moment, because of being a journalist, you're traveling around the country and you're staying in hotels or whatever. And I would always try a different whiskey. And I used to make little notes of every single whiskey. And I didn't give scores. I just tried to pick out what was different from one whiskey. Now, what gave that whiskey a little edge? So from the age of 17, I was absolutely fascinated. And when I got, when I started thinking, actually, I better be careful about this because this is a lot of whiskey. from a very early age, I started spitting as well. So I was aware that I really didn't want this stuff to be
Yeah.
taking me over. But I was fascinated about the aroma and about the flavors and the flavor development. And that's how I got into whiskey. And then later through the years, I devised the Murray method because I thought there's got to be a way to maximize the flavors and the aromas. And so I must have tried probably about 100 different ways, adding water, adding this, adding it. And the way that I worked out was basically if you slowly warm it, just really slowly warm it, the whiskey change. It's like a great wine. If you get a Chateau Margaux, you're having an absolutely immaculate meal and you've got a Chateau Margaux. That Chateau Margaux will change 100 times during that meal.
100%.
Because the oxidization and the temperature will just take it through different levels. Whiskey does exactly the same, but not if you add water. And it's already watered. It's already down.
Fair.
A lot of them are down to 40, 43, 46% or whatever.
Yeah.
To be at that strength, you've added water already. And so I discovered a long time ago the Murray method, and that means I never add water. And it also means that when I'm actually looking at a whiskey and doing the tasting notes, I haven't just tasted it once and at one temperature. I'm actually taking it right the way through its journey. And so when I describe the whiskey, it's a kind of a composite, if you like. It's the overall picture as well, the journey of where it goes and so on and so forth. And I try to, whenever possible, if there is a real genuine sweet spot where that whiskey hits its stride, then I say in the book, try it at such and such a temperature, because then you'll get something that normally you wouldn't see. So I think that's probably what set me apart from anyone else. It was the fact that if you think about it, let's say that a whiskey's spent 15 years in a warehouse or 21 years in a warehouse. It's no good just drinking it or tasting it in 2 minutes. It's taken 15, 21 years to get there. I think these whiskies deserve a little bit of respect and a little bit of time to find out what's happened on their journey. And then you go on a journey with them.
How do you warm up the whiskey?
Well, I cheat when I'm working on the Whiskey Bible because I'm tasting literally thousands of whiskies. So there I have the aid of warm water. And I have a special glass and tulip shape, but it has a long stem. So then that goes down into the water and I can then slowly warm it. So by the time I can do it in probably so much faster than if you're hand warming it.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm sitting at home and I'm just going to have a relaxing whiskey, I will just take it through that journey myself. It'll be very personal. When I'm working on my book, the Bible, you don't have time to do that. I'm tasting 20 whiskies a day. If I was doing it by hand, I'd be lucky if I got 5 or 6 done.
Yeah.
So you just can't do that.
So if we were to taste a whiskey today, we can do it by hand?
Absolutely.
Okay, super. I've got something we'll taste together. It's something I blended in Scotland.
Yeah.
It's one of those things you do at a distillery visit.
Need the right glass.
Yeah. So we will get to that a little later. At which point in time did you realize that whiskey journalism would be your main thing? And how did Whiskey Bible come?
Well, that was the point, because I was married during the 80s, and I told my ex-wife, they've been married since, probably in about 1986, maybe slightly before, that it was something I was going to seriously look at, but not for a long time, because I was busy raising children and so on and so forth, and I couldn't really afford to just go into that.
Okay.
But because it was the unknown. There were people writing about whiskey, but they were beer writers or they were wine writers. And there was one particularly great writer who sadly died, a guy called Michael Jackson.
Yeah, of course.
And Mike and I were great friends. And if you offered him a whiskey or a beer, he'd take a beer. He was always a beer guy. But Michael was a great communicator. He wasn't doing it full time. And at some stage, I thought, people write about beer, people write about wine. Whiskey deserves and needs a full-time whiskey writer. So I took an amazing gamble. I went from earning a lot to earning 0 overnight.
Yeah.
because I just thought that if I didn't do it, I wasn't being honest to myself. I wasn't being brave. And at that stage, to be honest with you, whiskey was in a slump.
Which year was this?
Well, whiskey during the 80s really struggled. In Scotland, there was a thing called the whiskey lock. The Scotch whiskey industry had produced way too much whiskey. They weren't selling it. Blended whiskey was out of fashion. And they hadn't yet moved on to single malts. So the single malt whiskey, the love of single malt whiskey came from the demise of blended whiskey, because what they discovered is that they had loads of all this whiskey sitting around in the warehouse. What do we do with it? And basically it was me and Michael Jackson, really, who went out and got people discovering single malt whiskies. But of course, Michael wrote a great book on it, a really fantastic book on it. Sadly, he's forgotten now a bit, which really is a shame. And then I did something similar. Every book I've tried to do, I've always tried to be different. My book was different from Michael because my perception of whiskey was a little bit different from Michael's.
How, if I may ask?
He hadn't spent a long time studying it. So Michael got into it because of the fact that a publisher asked him if he was interested in whiskey. And he said, well, I don't really know that much about it. But being a good freelance journalist, he said, I can learn. So Michael was actually learning as he was going along. And we all do that. We're all learning it. But I'd already been looking at various distilleries and what had been happening to the whiskies over a long time. So our perceptions were slightly different. But he was a great communicator. But I've also been a writer now for over 50 years. So one of the things I wanted to do was use my skills as a communicator and also my inner depth. But the really bizarre thing was that I thought until the early 90s that my ability to taste and smell was exactly the same as anybody else. Right? I thought my nose, whatever I tasted, whatever I experienced, was the same. And it was later on, a blender said to me, you should be a blender. Because he had a series of tests over me. And I just scored ridiculously. And he said, what about not being a writer? What about being a blender? And that shocked me because I didn't realize that I had that level of skill. It never even began to occur to me. Why should it? I just thought it was the same as everybody else. But it turns out I wasn't. When I was told that, I think that gave, in fact, it was he who told me that I should write tasting notes. Because what I've been writing about was the actual distilleries and the way the whiskies moved around. But I didn't really do tasting notes as such. I just thought, who would be interested?
Oh, the whole wide world.
Yeah, but I didn't realize that. And it was someone else who actually persuaded, several people actually worked on me to take a different direction. And yeah, it's worked out really.
Do you think, speaking of blenders, it also amazes me that if someone's a blender, A, the skill, B, the pressure to make a good product consistently.
Right.
That's a lot of pressure. How come a lot of blenders don't write? Because I would assume that would come naturally to them.
Because they're not writers. Writing is a kind of a gift, a skill, whatever. For instance, when I worked for an agency, I would go and do a story, and I'd been trained to write that story 3 different ways. So you write it for the quality papers, you write it for the tabloids, and you write it for television and radio. So you've got that as a writer, but then you've got the inner writer within you as well, and some are better than others. And I could write either news or features. So I could do hard news, and I did a lot of murders and all that kind of stuff. So I could do the hard news. I did sport. And that was something else. Actually, the sport was really important in the way that I tackled criticizing whiskey, because I was covering sport and getting paid for it from the age of 14. And when I was about 15 or 16, there was me reporting on professional footballers for a paper. And I criticized a guy who was a professional footballer. And he basically said, you only gave me 6 out of 10. I was much better than that. What do you know about football? Because there he was in his late 20s, and there was me, 16, whatever. giving this professional only 6 out of 10. I said, yeah, I was viewing it as a spectator. I was viewing it as, what were you doing? I remember vividly, he'd made a mistake that led to a goal. I said, you gave the ball away and they scored from that. And he said, oh,
Yeah,
right.
there you go. Simple, right?
Yeah, he said, good point. And I said, and secondly, I said, your midfield, you were meant to be picking up the guy and he ran through the midfield. You didn't run with him and he scored. So you were responsible for 2 goals. And that's why I only gave you 6. I said, maybe I should have given you 5. And he looked at me in amazement. He said, yeah, all right, you got a point. And that day I learned, even though I was 15 or 16 or whatever, and I was dealing with someone bigger than me, if you like, I learned that you had to be honest. You really had to be totally honest and say what you saw, say what you experienced, and not be frightened or intimidated. That was an amazing lesson for me, that. And I have actually used that right the way through my career. Totally honest. Don't be intimidated. Don't write what other people want you to write. I won't do that. And going back to blenders, well, I do blend now. I'm a consultant blender because I think all writers are also creatives.
Yeah.
And blending is seriously creative. And blending is almost like going back to football. It's like being a football manager.
Yeah.
So basically, when you're a football manager, you have a squad or you bring players in because you want to create a certain style. And when you're a blender, you have a squad of whiskies in the warehouse, or if it's a blended whiskey, you bring the players in, the whiskey in that you want, because you want to create this, that, and the other. So there's actually an enormous similarity with football or cricket on that one. If it's cricket, I did actually want to be a professional cricketer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely I did. And it just wasn't good enough. I got as close as once nearly playing for Derbyshire Seconds, and that's as close as it ever got. But if you're a cricketer, do you use a spinner? Are you just going to use an all-seam attack? So how far do you want your middle order to be? Do you want to bat down to 9 or do you want to down to 11? You have tactics. And it's exactly the same with whiskey. Do you want this whiskey to actually be layered, or do you want it to just have one signal going all the way through at various strengths? And you choose sometimes from what you're given, from what you have available, but sometimes you're given a free hand. And so this year, I think last year, I actually won a double gold somewhere or other with something that I created. And what I did actually was I created a really old-fashioned style that's almost vanished. And so I was going back to some 50 years of whiskey tasting experience to actually bring back a almost gone extinct style.
So tell me, what is that extinct style like? How has it evolved now?
It was the softness of the grains versus the malts. And I'm famous actually for bringing Ardbeg back from the dead and being their first blender actually, which was a journey which started in India, weirdly enough.
Oh, really?
In 1997. I was finishing a book called Jim Murray's Complete Book of Whiskey. And my final research was being done here in India. I'd been to India before. I think I first came here in 1994. But I was here for a little while, going around different distilleries. And I got a phone call and they said, from Glenmorangie, they said, can you get back? And I said, why? They said, we've bought Ardbeg. I said, oh, brilliant. I think that's great news because I've been campaigning to save it from it was going to be knocked down. And I campaigned to make sure that didn't happen. And I said, why do you want me? And they said, our blender hates peated whiskey. It makes him feel sick. So they said, look, you're the only guy who knows this distillery. Can you come back? And so I got this phone call here in India and I flew back to England and did my first blending job, actually.
First blending job for Ardbeg.
Of that kind of stature. I've done other stuff, but of that kind of stature, yeah. So there was a lovely Indian feel to that as well. But blending is important. And that's another thing about my writing, because when I'm actually looking at a blend, I can tell which ones have been just just cobbled together. In other words, it hasn't been blended. It's basically stock being put together. That's very different to proper blending, where you are actually creating layering and structure. And just from nosing and tasting, I can normally tell which one has been properly blended by someone who knows what the hell they're doing, and a whiskey cobbled together by a company who had some whiskey.
Yeah, they had a whiskey.
Or they're just working from stock profile. and they're not actually they're just making it work so that they can then follow with something similar next time out. Again, that's not blending, because whiskies change over years. And again, that's where I think I'm slightly different, because I can look at the structure and I can see what the blender's trying to do. And sometimes you think, yeah, it's worked. Other times you think, yeah, he's almost got there. And of course, one of the other problems is that he could create something, but what actually happens in the bottling hall might be something else. Sometimes I feel a bit sorry for blenders, because you can see that they're just about there, but you can see that something has not quite gone according to plan when they bottled it. So we're now talking really high levels of knowledge, but I suppose studying for 50 years this subject, I suppose that's where it takes you.
At what point, tell me in which year did Whiskey Bible start? And at which point did you realize the power it has?
The power of the Bible. Good question. Actually, probably from the very first edition, which came out in 2003. It's a 2004 edition. And in the first edition, I really gave distillers a real kicking, because they were putting caramel in whiskey. And one of the things, if someone asked me to blend, I'll say fine, but no caramel. I refuse to work with caramel. And the only time I ever work with caramel is if a company bring me in because they got a problem with their whiskey. It's an established whiskey. They got a problem with their whiskey and they're not quite sure what that problem is. And they might bring me in to do an autopsy on it, find out where the problem is, take that problem out and put something else in. And then, but that's not me creating something. That's just me doing some repair work. But I really gave a right hammering. And what was curious at this stage was that the independent bottlers, if we see an independent bottler now, all the whiskey is usually 46 minimum, and usually cask strength, and no filtration, chill filtration, no colour. When the Whiskey Bible first came out, virtually only Cadenheads were the only independent bottling company that I can think of right now that actually did not add any colour, because it was accepted in the industry that you coloured. So even Gordon MacPhail, they coloured all their whiskies. And I remember the shockwaves that went round when I really had a go. And immediately, virtually all the independent bottlers dropped colour out of their whiskey. So from the very, very first edition of the Whiskey Bible, it had an immediate effect that you still see today all around the world, in that for independent bottles, the colour's gone. Not so much so with the big guys.
The bigger brands, yeah.
Unfortunately. But what was interesting was that when I took on the job with Glenmorangie for Ardbeg, again, I said, I'll do it, but there can be no colour added. And I think that in every single whiskey they've ever produced, they've only added colour to one in all that time. And I only blended for them for a year or so, until they trained someone else up. So good on them. They've kept their word. They've kept that tradition. And people like Penderyn in Wales, they said, yeah, but we were told that colouring was fine. And I said, it isn't. So they dropped it. Because what caramel does is that it actually masks the flavours. They say it's neutral. It is not neutral. So occasionally I blend rum. So I go to the West Indies, I'll blend rum. Now, rum is made of sugar. Caramel is made of sugar. So I have no problem, because the British Navy was using caramel in rum 200 years ago. And in fact, if you go to Guyana, there's actually a particular mark. They call them marks. The different styles are called marks. There's actually a mark where they put the caramel into the barrel and then put the spirit in and let the rum mature in that barrel. And so how can you say it makes no difference? Of course it makes a difference. And those particular barrels have a very coffeed, rich. So when you're blending pot still rum, this has amazing dynamic. So I use that. But that's different to whiskey.
Yeah, very different.
And the other thing it does is that it changes the mouthfeel as well and the finish. So caramel, no, I'm not a fan. And the Bible has done a huge amount to eradicate that out of whiskey.
Tell me more impacts of the Bible, right? Let's say Poland, Yamazaki, and Indian whiskies.
Yeah.
The popularity.
Yeah, I don't think the Bible's done any harm to Indian whiskey. I think it helped get it out there. Japan even more so, because when I gave Japanese whiskey World Whiskey of the Year, it just rocketed off the shelf. First of all, it was the Yamazaki that actually won it, that vanished. And weirdly enough, I was actually, probably about 2 years later, I was on a plane, and this guy kept looking at me, and he said, "Do I know you?" And I said, "You're Jim Murray, the whiskey writer." I said, "Yeah." He says, "You've made me loads of money." I said, "Oh, I'm pleased to hear that." I said, "What did you do?" He says, "When you gave the Japanese World Whiskey of the Year, a friend of mine happened to have a couple of cases, and I bought it." And he says, "It's gone, the value has gone through the roof."
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, great, but it'd be even better if you drank it. This stuff is so good, you can't just not drink it."
That was the Yamazaki sherry cask.
It was. And what was great about the sherry cask was that it wasn't sulfur treated. It was actually, what they decided to do was just bring the butt from Jerez, no treatment. And if it got an infection, they were just going to bin it. They did not want to go down the route that the Scots had and the Irish gone down of buying casks that have been sulfur treated, which was a very wise move. So tasting that Yamazaki was like going back to Scotland in the 70s and the early 80s before this all happened, it all broke. But I bumped into I was doing a show in Shanghai, and the CEO of Suntory bumped into me. He said, "Jim," he says, "you've made us $3 billion. They'd sold all their whiskey.
Yeah.
He said, "We made $3 billion profit because of the." So it's impossible to say I got nothing. I joke back, I think I've sold 7 extra books in Japan because I don't charge companies to go in the Bible. So I don't make any money out of that. I don't take advertising. I play it absolutely straight. I don't make money from sold whiskey. So if I'm blending, I get paid per day.
That's a different gig.
Yeah, but I get paid per day. I don't get paid on
Yeah.
sales. I don't do that. So people can't accuse me of being biased. And I don't do things just so that I can cream it in. Otherwise, you're losing your neutrality. And what I always want people to do with the Whiskey Bible is trust me. This is a totally independent voice. So if I'm blending for someone, one of the first things I say is, look, guys, don't expect an extra point in the Whiskey Bible. And if I blend something, I don't actually either put the whiskey in or I don't give it a mark.
Because I'm pretty sure producers would somewhere think that if they're bringing you on board, you might be favorable.
They know me too well.
Which is
They
strange.
they just know I won't play that game. The Bible it's sold well over 1 million, a lot of copies. And I'd say it's definitely had some kind of influence out there. And genuinely for the good.
We will take a small break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask Jim about how he sees Indian whiskies, the whole journey and the future. Be right back.
This is the Whiskey Pod with Aneesh.
Okay, we're back on the Whiskey Pod. I'm with Jim Murray, and we are going to taste a whiskey together that I blended in Scotland at the Stratala Distillery,
Right.
home of Chivas.
Great
and
distillery.
Great distillery. I had such a good time. I've only been to Scotland once. I did Stratala and Arbella, and I'm a big fan of their whiskies, the sherry cask stuff.
Okay.
But this is something I blended there. Let's taste this together, and I would love to again understand how you taste. Now, you were telling me your palate is not prepared for tasting.
No, because what I do is I don't do certain things or eat or drink certain things before tasting because it plays with your taste buds. So I don't have anything that's sweet, or for instance, excuse me. And today I have. Yeah, we can have some great fun with this.
Yeah.
But this wouldn't be how I would normally do
It's
it.
all
Now,
right. I'm not a master
right,
blender.
so straight away, you're doing that. But by doing that, you're actually kicking up alcohol. So when I nose and taste, I keep it absolutely still. Can I just watch the way that you nose?
You're going to rip apart my regular way of tasting because I would aggressively swirl it in that Glencairn glass
Right.
and then give it a little swirl, smell, you get all
Okay,
those
but how do you nose it? Can I just see the way that you nose? So what you're doing is that you're putting an angle and you're sticking your nose almost in, which means that you're going to pick up the alcohol. And we all know it's got alcohol.
Yeah.
It can't be whiskey if there's no alcohol in there. So I avoid it. And the way I avoid it is by keeping it absolutely dead straight and then bring it. And now you're perfectly set up. You've got a moustache.
Yeah.
Everyone should grow a moustache. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman.
For
Just
tasting
grow a
whiskey.
moustache for your whiskey. And then what you do is that you let this touch your moustache under your nostril, but not in the middle. You go left, and then this is the important bit. You actually breathe, you time your breathing so that as you breathe in normally and as you breathe out, it moves away. Breathe. No, you're going central. Don't
Yeah.
go central. Go right, left. But time it with your breathing. No, you're going across.
So one by one left, one right.
So just go breathe in, breathe out,
Got it.
breathe in. So you time it with your natural breathing. Because the one thing I don't want you to do is I don't want to see your diaphragm moving. Keep it straight. It's at an angle.
Damn, I didn't realize this would be so different.
And this way, you pick up the actual notes of the whiskey, but not the alcohol.
This already feels so much more delicate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a fruity note on this, which you do not get. So do what you did before, where you stick your nose in. It's
So
different.
Yeah.
It's more aggressive.
Yeah.
And then you do it this way. And it's just so much softer. And now you can concentrate on the whiskey itself, not the alcohol.
That's way softer. You're right. Absolutely right.
And so that means that your brain's not fighting to pick out. Your brain is being told. Totally different.
Totally different. You don't get the fumes. You don't get that hit.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly. Now, this is a relatively cool temperature. So what I do is that, providing you haven't got any aftershave or anything like that, hand over the top and hold it to your body. Yeah, so 2 fingers on each, hold it to your body, get some heat in there. And you can see why you can't do this when you're writing the Whiskey Bible. This would take all day.
You'll take 1 year just to taste 10 whiskeys.
Exactly. So that's why I have hot water to help it along. And what all you're doing is that you're exciting the molecules, making the molecules move around, and you're releasing more secrets, if you like. So it is pretty cold, and this would take a bit. We could have done with some hot water for brevity's sake. But again, what you then do is that you take your hand away, you let the alcohol escape, and then you bring it back in slowly, head straight. Because if your head is down, it will go straight into the glass. Your nose will go into the glass.
I love this. It feels like I'm in a coaching session. That kind of a vibe. I like this. This is the strictest whiskey tasting I've.
Yeah, but it's the most beneficial because you're going to see the whiskey. You've done a good job putting this together.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've got to say, from the nose anyway. Now, did you know that you had blended something this delicate?
No, I don't think so. I was going for, from what I remember, something more on the fruitier side though. And of course, it's not like this is something they do at the tasting room. So it's not like we have hundreds of options to pick from. But I think I went for something that I really liked that time. I have not tasted this since, I think I'd blended this about 6-7 years back. So I've opened this right after.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Saved it for a special occasion.
Honestly, I am honored. Wow.
Oh, my pleasure.
So it's not commercially available.
Never say never, never. Might have happened later in life. But which also brings me to, while this warms up, what has been your outlook on Indian whiskey? And since when have you seen the journey?
Well, I first came here, I think, in 94. And that was interesting because it was embryonic. And distilleries were learning about maturation as much as anything else because of the heat here. How do you handle it? But obviously, the stills weren't always what you would call optimal. You picked up some strange notes just from the distilling. But some great people came out here early on. So White Mackay were out here quite early on. And there was this fantastic clamour for information to get it right. But you got the sense that it was something that was going to end up good because there were so many people wanting to get it right. And so for me, it's been absolutely fascinating over 3 decades watching what's happened in this country and in some cases helping them along as well. And it's been an honour to do that as well, to be a part of that. And it's the same with the people in India and their understanding of whiskey. Once upon a time, it was Johnny Walker Black. That was your god and guru whiskey. That was liquid gold bars in this country. That isn't the case, or not so much. It's still revered, but people have realised that there's other things out there, and there are other stories coming from the glass. And people are now discovering, and they're getting the confidence. And that's why I love doing tastings out here, because I love to give them the confidence to explore and discover. Not just discover the whiskies, but discover what they like themselves, which is very important. Not what they're told to like or this and that, but make their own minds up. All because I say a whiskey is great, it may not be to their taste. So say, no, actually, I don't quite like that. But I have now the ability to look at a whiskey in a certain way that I can discover what I do, which is every bit as important.
Also, the whiskey narrative for India has changed globally. Like now when I go out abroad, I'll usually see a bottle of Indian whiskey at a bar.
Yes.
Which earlier was not the case.
Amazing, isn't it?
The only spirit I would see, Indian spirit I would see, was Old Monk rum.
Yep.
Which mostly every bar would have.
Yep.
But now I'll see a Amrut, Paul John, Indri or something or the other.
Yep.
And they're all quality products.
Amrut were the first.
Yeah, of course.
They were the first. And they'd done a fantastic job. They really did. They were making great whiskey. They were lovely people as well. No, they really... It's the thing about the Whiskey Bible. I know some amazing people in whiskey whom I love. They're dear to me. And I've never been able to give them an award because the whiskey's not quite good enough. And there's people in the industry whom I don't like at all. There's just something about them. I can take them or leave them. But I've given their whiskies awards because their whiskies are fantastic. You have to be honest about these things. Amrut was one of those rare cases that won awards and they were great people. It was a real pleasure to give awards to them. They so deserved it. And I had a little hand in helping along doing the training at Paul John, and that made a difference as well because they were producing something different and they were a little bit puzzled by it. And I think I gave them the confidence to carry on with what they were doing and make the most. And they've got an amazing blender there.
Oh, yeah.
Michael, I've trained a lot of blenders in my life, and Michael is my number one. He's the guy, I think, who's really got it.
Michael made me try a port finish whiskey once from the barrel. And that's my favorite dram of Indian whiskey I've ever had in my life. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's brilliant to hear.
He's so talented. Incredible.
He is. So now hopefully this is warmed up slightly. So take your hand away, let the alcohol disappear, let the whiskey stop moving, and now bring it really slowly. And it's now got less fruit, but you're getting the vanilla off the oak coming through.
Also, the fruit for me has become more like orange marmalade sort of a vibe.
Yeah, but it's not as prominent. That vanilla from that oak has now come through much more confidently.
Yeah, it's got that warmth now, that comforting warmth of oak. Yeah.
Now, normally I spit, but it's your rare whiskey, so I will not spit this. Okay? There's so little of it. So when it comes to tasting, what I do is, obviously I've got flavours in my mouth and what have you from things that I've done earlier today. So the first whiskey I taste will basically just get rid of that. It neutralizes that. So I never, ever use the tasting notes for my first mouthful. So the first mouthful is the preparation. So I'll just do that. That you don't take any notice of this.
Sure.
And it'll always be bitter. The first mouthful is always bitter. So I'll do that. Quite hard, but it will be. You watch what happens on the second mouth. Once it's like facing that first ball.
Yeah.
You've got to get your eye in. So, now the second one, I will always nose. And then when I taste, I close my eyes and I concentrate entirely on the whiskey. I open my mouth and I chew it. In honor of your first
Thank
ever
you
blend,
again.
I will swallow this. Much softer than that first one, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, what am I looking for? So, whiskey is sensual because it hits the aroma, it hits the taste. So, you got smell, taste. What's the third thing that comes into play? Touch. Because the whiskey is touching you inside. It's either going to caress or it's going to rip or it's going to do nothing. But there's a caress. So touch is important. This is why whiskey is genuinely sensual, because it's playing with your senses. And the first thing to hit me about that second taste was the sensuality. There's a lovely soft oiliness to it, and it's viscous and it's clinging to the inside. And it's not shouting. It's not aggressive. And still doing that. So it's got a long finish because it's on my tongue and I can feel it against. So there's no off notes either.
I've done a half decent job with this.
You've done a very decent job.
Super, thank you.
Now I'll get into the nuts and bolts. Okay, what are those characteristics? And of course, the biggest thing that's coming through is malt. That's the main characteristic, which is typical Speyside. And do you see what I mean about that viscosity
Oh, yeah.
on the roof of the mouth? That's giving it the length. And now coming off that is spice. Just a little bit of spice is coming off it. And with it comes the tannin as well. So the sweetness is offered by the barley, the malted barley. The dryness is coming off the oak. I'm not picking up fruit on the taste, although I picked it up early on the nose. I don't know if someone can
Get some hot
because
water.
I would love you to taste this at a higher temperature.
How do you like hot water
Well, what
in
we
a
need is
carafe?
just a bowl,
Okay,
and we'll plonk it in a bowl.
okay. Wait, check.
I want you to see this really talking,
I would love to do that.
because the air conditioning is keeping this cool.
Meanwhile, I have two other questions to ask you, so I'll get to that. All right. Jim Murray, as the world's foremost whiskey critic, what would be 3 whiskeys according to you that everyone should have in their bar?
Oh, wow. That is so difficult because everyone's different. And it's like being at a party, isn't it? You meet different people, and some people you really take to and you enjoy what they're saying, it may not be the same as other people.
100%.
So for me, I think that's difficult. I think what I would say is have one great single malt, one great rye, and one great bourbon.
So 2 American, actually rye could be,
Rye could be from
be
anywhere in
either,
the world.
yeah.
It's made in a lot of
Yeah.
places. The best is made in America, it must be said. But there's also amazing rye in Canada as well.
oh yeah.
So I would say find an absolutely astonishing bourbon and an astonishing single malt, because there you're the only thing is with the single malt, can we make it 4?
You can absolutely make it 4.
Have one that's non-peaty and one that's bright.
Absolutely agree with that.
So you
And
could
when
have 5, because you'd have one. Your favourite whiskey was the port finish.
Oh yeah.
So you might want to, you see, the single malts could come in so many different guises.
True.
Because you've got whiskies that have been matured 100% in a wine cask, finished in a wine cask, which gives you a different feel altogether. But even with single malts, you've got such a wide variety. But I wouldn't want people to miss out on the extraordinary depths of rye and bourbon as well.
Next question. Tell me 3, or you could do 3 or 5 for that matter, whiskeys that you think are really underrated, that people might see around them or see at duty free or see at shops, but they just overlook them.
I've got to think about that one. There's 1 or 2 Scotch whiskies which go right under the radar. One of them is called, it's from the Knockdhu distillery, and it's called An Knock. And it's absolutely astonishing. That can then go in it. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I got 1.
So that is one that I would say is always just total. And when people discover it, like, wow, where's that come from? Another one that is overlooked is Glen Grant, which to me these days is the best Scotch whiskey distillery in the world,
Luckily we
or
get
in Scotland.
that here now.
Totally overlooked, I think. But it is just brilliant. It's just the most delicate of all the Scotches. So that doesn't get very much hype behind it at all. People don't quite realise how good that is. And sometimes it could be something like a blend as well. So some of the older Shivers blends, and the thing that people think, it's blend, it's not going to be as good. But think about it. It's a bit like that football manager again. He's built a team, or a cricket manager. He's built that team, and the blenders at Shivers are pretty good. So they know what they're doing. And when it comes to really older whiskies in a very high class. So it's just little things like that can be, they're not always overhyped, but they're there and they're not always discovered. But I would always say, look, see a whiskey you've never seen it before, give it a go.
Yeah.
I mean,
fair to
look
go
in the
by.
Bible, and just if it gets a low mark,
Yeah.
it's probably not worth it. But if you don't have a Bible with you, just experiment, stick to the same thing. But your second bottle should be alternate. It should be changing around and around the world. If I hadn't got people around the world drinking Indian or drinking Japanese, so I always say to people, please just try things.
And mind you, Indian whiskeys are not cheap. It's not like they'll be cheaper than any other whiskey either.
No.
Speaking of what you said, Shivers, I used to really enjoy the Ballantine 17. I've not had that in a
That
while.
won so many awards in the Whiskey Bible. It changed because what they did is that they closed down their main grain distillery, which at Dumbarton I think was criminal, basically. And they shifted production to a distillery in Glasgow, which was okay, but it wasn't Dumbarton. The big problems with Scotch whisky, and this is why I think probably what I tried to create, I was using whiskies from grain distilleries that no longer exist. And if you buy whiskey from an auction and you buy, say, a blend that was created 50 years ago, virtually none of those grains will be around because most of the grain distilleries got closed down. This was the Scots shooting themselves in the foot. Big mistake. We'll sign out with your whiskey at full whack.
All right. Thought I would be doing this.
So you can remember what it was like when it was cool.
Yeah.
We'll just move it around very slightly so all sees it.
It's like a hot bath.
Yeah, it's having a bath. Now let the alcohol vanish and now bring it in. Put back into the other glass. Now,
It's actually become brighter.
I'm sorry, it's singing to you now.
Yeah. This goes against everything I was told. The water, maybe a little bit of cold water, maybe have it with 1 cube of ice.
No. And now taste it. Now the fruit's coming out, and it wasn't when it was colder.
100%.
And
Well,
look
yeah.
how mouth-watering that is compared to how it was before. Same whiskey,
Same whiskey.
but different.
Thank you so much for making me taste like this. And
My pleasure.
thank you for being on the Whiskey Pod. This was an absolute pleasure. And I'll be seeing you tomorrow or on Friday, and we'll taste more whiskeys together.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Cheers.
Great to see you.